So I'm Gabe Mattingly. I work in e-commerce at Kimberly-Clark, and it's a great opportunity to be here today. There we go. Because at Kimberly-Clark, we represent some iconic brands, and these brands are fantastic to work on, and our goal here is to really deliver essentials for a better life. As was mentioned, we are a large company, and we're operating in 175 countries. We are impacting 1 out of 4 people on Earth every single day with our products. So 1 out of 4 people use our products every single day. So as you can tell, that's not really indicative of what you would think of as a startup culture. And I'm not here to tell you that all of KC in those 175 countries operates as a startup culture. But we are able to generate some learning and some opportunity in nuanced small pieces of our organization to operate like a startup. Now, to be clear, we're not looking to install slides in all of our offices. We're not looking to think that we can bring our dogs to the office. We are instead trying to operate like a startup. But we have to realize what we're probably perceived as is more of the corporate stock photography type people who are going to not necessarily move at the pace of the market. So what are we doing to counteract that? Because it's not an easy thing to counteract. Something that we've done is we've instituted what we call the KC Challenge. So in the last 2 years at CES, we've been able to implement what we call like a Shark Tank event, where we bring in 20 startups from across the world, actually, and they allow us to get an insight into what startups are doing, how they're activating in market, and what we should be picking up from them to take forward into KC. So in the last 2 years, we've seen close to 40 startups, and although it's a Shark Tank-like event, we're not just picking one and going with one. Instead, as we look at those 40 startups, we're working with almost all of them in some capacity. So while there are winners in the Shark Tank event, we think it's a bigger opportunity to learn and pull insights from those type of companies. So what are the big insights that we've learned from a lot of our startups? One is that we have to realize, and we have to come to the realization and embrace it actually, that today, right now, is the slowest pace of change we'll see for the rest of our careers. And when you start to embrace that and start to think about how that starts to influence how we go to market, how we think about the processes and the organization that we have, it's really quite liberating. It gives us an opportunity to think differently about our organization and how we activate. But it's not just me saying that, it's not just startups. If we look at something as obtuse a little bit as Moore's Law, we see the pace of change accelerating for 50 years on end, right? Then if we look at what's happening in the social space, we see things like the conversation prism, which I think a lot of you probably have a logo on here somewhere, but the complexity that's involved here is staggering. And just from a couple of years ago, we're seeing twofold what we used to see. So we take that embrace of the fact that pace is only accelerating, and then we think about how do we apply that to this big organization that has lots of processes, highly matrixed, and lots of processes, let's be frank. So we really look at what we used to do. So we are a matrix organization. We have more intersecting lines and more intersecting points of contact than you can really shake a stick at. And what we've realized is that we used, and we still do in a lot of instances, actually activate based on our organization. So we think about what does the organization do, how are we going to activate that, then we create our plans based on that organization. And then really where we end up is somewhere where we're like, okay, look what we did. We produced something. But was that what we produced the right thing? Was it the best we could do? Was it because of our organization and how we're structured? And really what we've realized is, for a large part, it is, because we're not moving at the accelerated pace, and we're not embracing all the different technology trends that we have at our disposal. So now what we're doing, in pockets again, is we're looking at how do we think about our brands, our messages to consumers, and what we want to convey. And that is incredibly important. We've talked about not wanting to have speed for speed's sake and making sure that we're entirely focused on one simple goal, and that's what we're doing. So we know what our brand story is. We know what our architecture is. We know how we want to move to market, and we know who we want to get. From there on, it's really how fast can we move and what levers can we pull. Because once you know what you want to do and you have clear expectations, both internal and at the agency, and then you have clear calls to action on how fast we want to move to market, it becomes much easier to iterate in market and for us to move at a pace where we feel comfortable and we actually can out and innovate both our competitors, which we care about, but also others in the space that aren't necessarily looking at CPG type outputs. Then what we do is we do a deep assessment. We understand, how does the organization need to change? So we just went through this a little bit, where we looked at not necessarily where do we start from an organizational perspective, but how do we think about the output we need to generate. And what we've done is we've reorged much of our North American operations to start to act in this way, that we're going to focus on being super distilled in what we want to accomplish and our expectations both internally and externally, and then go execute on that, and then think about how the organization has to change after that. So it's incredibly liberating, one, to move at the pace of the market, but two, understand that a lot of the organizational pressures that I think a lot of us feel, we can mitigate in a lot of different ways. Now that's not easy, because you have to figure out what your story is in order to create space for you to go create output that's not necessarily aligned to an established process. It's not easy for a lot of different reasons, because when you think about your story, I think a lot of us kind of feel like in some way or another we're getting punched in the face, right? Whether it's from a competitor, a lot of times it's from your internal process and how things might be pushing back at you and how you might be doing a lot of work without much output. Or maybe you're their internal champion. You have access to budgets, you have access to resources, you have the right story that you can tell. So it wasn't easy to transition in some pockets, again, it's not everywhere, to the place where we're able to focus on the output as opposed to the process. But it took some getting punched in the face. It took some realization that we're not moving as fast as we need to be moving. And then we had to find the right internal champions, because it's not a singular effort either. So in doing that, we were able to organize and move and influence the executives who had to make the decision on how we're going to move forward and make us feel like we have the right people that we can rally behind. So distilling your story and getting from punched in the face to a champion is important. And it's not a linear journey. I still feel like I'm punched in the face almost every day, and that's perfectly fine. But knowing full well that we have the backing of the organization to go and get punched in the face and figure out how we start to duck and move on is incredibly important. So been flying through the presentation, but there's one thing that I certainly want to leave you with, and this is Mario Andretti, and I'm not a race car fan, but I like the quote. And I can't help but think he wasn't really interested in a room full of us, marketing nerds and technology people, when he came up with the quote. But I think it's also, if we think about the pace of the market and we think about what Mario brings with this quote, it is helpful to understand if you push and you push and you push, you're going to feel like you're out of control. And that's not comfortable for a lot of our big organizations. It's not comfortable for the organization I'm in. But if we find pockets and we're able to focus and get the right type of champions, it is something that we can go make a difference on. And when we're moving fast, you have to make it known that we're going to be out of control a little bit. And that's okay as long as you have the right champion that can help you internally, or you're able to generate the output. Because the output is what really gets people bought into these types of approaches. That's what I have. Any questions? No?
We have time for some questions.
Hi. Can you talk about an example of a project recently where Kimberly-Clark really thought like a startup?
Yeah, so when I mentioned that KC Challenge event that we had in Las Vegas at CES in January, we came out of that and we said the challenge here isn't saying, yes, we want to go do this. The challenge here is how fast can we go do it? Let's strip away things like not legal restrictions. We have legal restrictions, sorry. Let's make sure we have legal in the room, and let's make sure that we have full backing and clarity that we are going to go set a new standard for how KC moves to market here. And we need to do it in pockets and be very output focused, because then once you're output focused, it starts to generate that momentum and the realization within the company that things can happen at the pace that we want them to happen at. So coming out of that, we saw presentations from 20 different startups in the course of a day, and then we are in market or moving into market already with, I think, about 18 of them. So we challenged ourselves to, it's not just about having a nice meeting in Las Vegas, because we all would be part of that, right? But it's really about how do we generate that output. So it's holding ourselves to that same standard of we need to go figure it out and we need to create the process on the back end for the most part.
This one more up here. This one up here. Run, Tyler.
Thank you. I'm curious, you mentioned something about having to adjust internal processes to match this pace, and that's a challenge that we face daily. So I'm curious if you have any suggestions about working with the higher-ups to adjust existing processes to help meet this need.
I think it's how are you aligning your objectives and your expectations. So objectives are one thing, expectations are another. And if we say that we have the objective of doing X, Y, or Z, but the expectation is people will do this, right? And we're fortunate enough that a lot of our leadership is, whenever you have an idea, the first words out of their mouth are, how fast can we do it, right? So there's the realization that that has to occur. I think you also need the team that's going to be motivated to go break down those barriers and not be punched in the face and just take it, right? But to figure out how to get around being punched in the face. And I can't stress enough the output being incredibly important. So one of the freedoms we have a little bit is that we have transitioned. I've only been at Casey about 18 months, but we've transitioned to very much an output-focused organization. And what that allows you to do is, if you're generating your output, the inputs can be diverse and different and not necessarily conform to exactly what they need to conform to based on previous history.
I have a question. Was there ever a point where you felt like you were moving too fast and moving too much like a startup and it just was not going to be, in that particular case, something that Kimberly-Clark should be doing? Was there ever a time you felt that?
The short answer is yes, but I thought it was fantastic,
Okay.
right? So if you think of, if I'm a runner, right? The only way you run faster is by running faster. Your shoes aren't going to help you do it. Your water bottle's not going to help you do it. Your Fitbit's not going to help you do it, right? You just have to run faster. And sometimes you get really tired and exhausted, and sometimes you ache, but you're running faster. And if that's what's important to you, that's how you have to approach it.
Did you ever make a mistake, though?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
No,
And
that's okay.
yeah, the whole idea is if we make mistakes, we iterate on it, and we correct it, and we don't do it again, right? It's okay to make mistakes, just don't do it twice. The same one. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I have a quick follow-up. So you talk a lot about outputs, and what are some of the outputs that are most compelling to your internal stakeholders, or what are some of the things that you're doing to show success?
Sales, I think, is an easy one, right? So hit your number, and if we hit our number, a lot of freedom comes with that. So the ability to show that we're going to go hit our number is important. Then showing benchmarks of, yes, we might have gone and done something wrong, but we did it much faster than we used to, right? So we recently launched a new small business from an e-commerce perspective, and we did it in what was 8 weeks, where the last benchmark was 16 weeks. So we cut that down by half. We made a lot of mistakes on the way, and we weren't happy with where it ended up, but then we went and corrected them right away. So in 9 weeks, we were much further along than we were on the previous business that we had launched. So it's all about, again, setting the expectations and fixing the mistakes once you make them, because they're going to be made.
Good morning. I have a little bit of experience from Kimberly-Clark. I actually just left the organization last year, but I wanted to get your feedback on how important it is to align sort of your global versus your regional, knowing that you guys are an international organization, thought processes or even structures around thinking like a startup. Is this something that we're doing specifically in North America, or are you guys activating this across region?
Yeah, good question. So we have what we call a digital lab, and our digital lab is solely focused on finding the fastest moving and the best technology out in this space, largely into the startup community. We have a representative in Chicago who is responsible for North America. We also have somebody in Israel who's sourcing technology, enablement, and capability over there. So it is a global effort. I think we're approaching it slightly differently based on some of the capability set we have in North America and then over in Asia versus what you might see in Australia or Africa, right? But it is largely focused on the market and how we move in the market, because the market dynamic is much different here to Asia versus Europe.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Gabe. That was great. So we've kind of